lunch, so. There's the speech you write, there's the speech you give, and there's the speech you wish you gave. I can tell you right now, the speech I'm giving varies quite a bit from the speech I wrote, and then I'll post on the Virginia Cure website the speech I wish I'd given. So that goes here. But the focus that I'm bringing to this is narrow. It's strictly as an economist. So in that sense, we're looking at the output of goods and services in the economy. And so the rough measure of good is more is better and less is worse. You don't have to fully buy that, but that's kind of the general approach. So we're looking at employment, we're looking at business growth, we're looking at output of goods and services, and we're also, I think, in this discussion, or in background that brings these points, the discussion of inequality and somewhat reducing inequality as well. One definition that I want to highlight, and that's the definition that I'll be using here of discrimination. And economics is boring to a lot of people, especially to my wife who has to listen to this class. But discrimination to an economist means not using a resource despite its being productive. So we can talk about race discrimination or gender discrimination, but what we mean is not charity towards some group and employing that group because we like them, or we may or may not like them, but using them because they're the best for a certain kind of work or they're fully qualified for a certain kind of work. And I really want to distinguish that from charitable works. We're talking about those things that make the economy run better, that increase business, accelerate business growth, or accelerate civilian and total hiring. So it's that context that I want us to think about discrimination in what I have to say here. And if I do this right, and if I do it fast enough and clearly enough, there'll be 5 basic points in what I want to cover. If you don't mind raising your hands, how many of you have either heard the argument, expect to encounter the argument, or perhaps have made the argument in your head or elsewhere that it's not a good idea that inmates have jobs? If you hear the proposal made that inmates have jobs, there will be a rejoinder to that that is a bad idea, that will take jobs from civilian workers. How many of you have encountered an argument like that? Say again?
I say every day.
All the time, every day. That's the argument. And I should say, by the way, just really quickly, I don't know if Pauline's here, but I didn't know what CURE was about 25 years ago, I think it was, until Pauline showed up at a hearing that I was testifying in favor of something, and she gave a wonderful support to what I was proposing, and I had no clue who she is. And CURE has been behind me and helped me and goaded me and pulled me along ever since. So I'm always grateful for that. And the thing that I've worked on the most is this issue of labor force participation for people who are incarcerated. And what I found, just sort of as an aside, but is that this whole idea, number one, that these people matter, and they matter in social issues, seems more or less hidden. Robert Reich was on the news a couple of nights ago. Apparently he's got a big thing going now on inequality and overcoming inequality. And he talked about a bunch of things. I didn't hear a word about corrections or prison policy. And there are many books out, and more all the time, about addressing family breakdown. The black community, of course, we've got so much work done on that issue, but rarely talk about the economics of the criminal justice system and incarceration. And then that's frustrating. I could go on and on about just that issue, but even within the last few weeks, I spoke with a very well-known national economist who was the chief economist of the Department of Labor some years ago, and he just said, we don't have time to even think about this issue. And that's obviously pretty frustrating, particularly when we see statistics, as we saw this morning, where 1 of every 3 black men can be expected to be incarcerated sometime in his life. Well, what does that mean for the black community? What does that mean for black families? What does that mean for economic survival when you look at the discrimination that occurs after incarceration? The reasons why people are out of the labor force certainly matter. But the fact of being out of the labor force itself matters a great deal for economic survival and economic prosperity. We saw in the last few years in particular, there would be occasionally presentations on TV would say a certain town had a large National Guard contingent or a large reserves contingent, and they'd been pulled out and sent to Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever, and the devastation that wrought on local businesses because those people were absent. And in other cases, we've seen where there are epidemics occasionally, where there are epidemics and people are out of work because lots of people are sick, they're home, they're stuck. And we know that when that happens, the businesses for which they work suffer, and the neighborhoods in which they live suffer. And so there's a multiplier effect of unemployment, meaning when you close businesses in a community, all the support businesses begin to suffer as well. And a handy multiplier, if you want to call it that, is 2. For every job, if a person loses his job or her job, another person is likely to lose a job. And similarly for employment, if a new business comes in and people are hired, there's going to be a multiplier effect for expanded business to support that and so forth. Well, nationwide, we have about the male labor force equivalent of just shutting Michigan down. Sometimes you think it might be going that way anyway. About 2%, right? About 2% of working age American men, I'm not trying to exclude women, but this is by far the largest group, I think about 92% of people incarcerated, are out of the labor force through incarceration. That's the labor force of one average state, taken out. So in effect, we are losing the productivity of about one average state's male labor force. A huge loss to the American economy. And if you think about the multiplier effects of that again, it goes on well beyond that. And the statistic that means the most to me these days, emotionally, I have to admit, and I think it should be analytically. I think Steve was talking earlier about looking at the numbers and see what they mean. There are 2.3, I think we said, million persons incarcerated in U.S. jails and prisons. Well, they're estimated, what, 2.6? Now you see 2.7 million unsupported minor children of people who are incarcerated. The best I can tell is about 1 of every 5, 1 every 6 children on welfare in this country has an incarcerated parent. It's a pretty weak statistic, but that's the best we can find. In inner cities, my understanding is about 50% of the children have a parent in the criminal justice system, at least one parent in the criminal justice system. So if you think of that in terms of the economic consequences for those communities, it's highly unlikely that we will overcome inner city poverty if we continue to drive people out of the labor force and through the prison systems. The key of the first 5 points I want to make is that it is not good to exclude people who are incarcerated from labor force participation. We are harming not only those persons and their families and their communities, but we're affecting the entire economy because we do that. So in some sense, the reason we take them out doesn't matter so much as the fact that we have taken them out is slowing U.S. economic growth and competitiveness. And the point behind that I want to bring to you is don't apologize for being in favor of a person who is in the criminal justice system being brought into the labor force and recognizing the harm that that is doing, because that will not be a commonly accepted argument that you will hear. But I think if one pauses and looks back at the underlying economics of that, we are all shooting ourselves in the foot by driving people out of the labor force and out of productive and successful employment. And we need to turn that around, and we need to turn it around aggressively. I'm amazed that not more people who look at inequality fail to consciously look at the consequences of our criminal justice policies. Two subpoints under that one, that it is good to drive people into successful legal labor force participation and bad to exclude them from it. Two subpoints are, the best labor force strategy is to minimize incarceration in the first place. So I still have some scars from conversations at the sentencing project. In my not having said that, people began to think I was arguing for incarcerated people. I'm not. And second, where public safety does require incarceration, then the location of correctional facilities, the design of correctional facilities, the programs in correctional facilities should be designed around accelerating employment within those walls or within those communities, rather than what we have today, which actually pulls away opportunities from people being employed who must be incarcerated. So those two things. One, minimize incarceration wherever you can and keep people successfully working in the community through the entire process, from apprehension and arrest through the punitive phase and in parole and probation and so forth. And the second is, when you have to have them incarcerated, don't think you can't have them employed successfully. You can. And we need to design correctional facilities to welcome that sort of thing. Second of all, reentry. Since I've moved to Richmond, I've begun to look more at reentry, something that I tend to avoid and tend to think prevention of entrance would be more important than reentry. But I think there are a lot of excuses for things we do in reentry as well. But one of the things I've learned is that I've always thought that, I think Ben Franklin or Abraham Lincoln said, give a man a job and he'll solve his other problems. Well, people who know more about this than I do say, we give a lot of people jobs and they last about 2 weeks because they don't know how to hold a job. They're not familiar with jobs. And so for a large percentage of releasees, they seem to be coming out of correctional experiences and from their past lives unable to hold a job. So three things. First, we need, well, the key second point is, we need to move reentry back inside the walls during the correctional process. Right now we are destroying skills, we're eroding skills, we're taking people away from their familiarity with employment such as they might have had. And 3 points on that. The first is we really have to improve training and education. I don't want to avoid or miss saying we've got to increase education and training while people are in correctional facilities. That's probably one you'd all agree with fairly quickly. But second, when people come out, we need to support them. One of the things I'm learning from these other communities is that few folks coming out have just employment problems. They have personal problems, they have substance problems, they have mental health issues, they have complicated family lives. And all these things interfere with their ability to survive in jobs. And so people need support when they are re-entering the workplace. So those communities that I used to kind of maybe not respect as much as I should have, I think my respect for them has grown tremendously when I see the kinds of issues that people are facing on the way out. And third, and of course is my favorite, is we need to move employment experiences back inside the walls. We have just an extraordinarily small percentage, I think it's less than 0.25% of people who are incarcerated are on work release. Why? They're about to get out. We should be greatly expanding work release. And we should move employment back inside the walls. Prison industries are no substitute for an employment experience. We need people exercising those skills and learning them with the support that comes from work, from employment inside the walls, so that when they get out, an employer can look and see that she or he is working at a job similar to what's going to happen in their place of work. I think one of the things I'm learning is that a lot of employers are willing to hire people who've been incarcerated, but they want to be the second employer, not the first one. They want that person to have shown that they can do the work. And unless they can show that they can do the work, probably with good reason on their part, they oftentimes decline to hire them. The analogy that I make on reentry today is we're really expecting, it's analogous to shoving a person out of a plane and asking them to sew a parachute on the way down, because they get put out of prison and don't have the skills and the abilities or the support they need to succeed in the workplace. And we need to build that so that when they leave the correctional facility, they could survive in a job and show an employer that they know how to be employed and how to work productively. The third, and this ties my third of the five points, which may go to 6 before this is over, is that there's a program called PI, Prison Industry Enhancement. And those of you who know me know that I really like this program. And it's a program that permits a state, and Virginia is such a state, to allow private industries to come inside a correctional institution and put a production unit inside that institution, and I'll say hire incarcerated workers at market wages, and then there are deductions taken from those wages for board and room, taxes, victims compensation, and family support, with 20% left, at least 20% left to the worker for his or her savings upon getting out. And it's a wonderful program. It fits in exactly with what we think should be going. It has its flaws, but it's a good program. And Virginia has a law that allows it, but it's dormant now. It's been dormant for a number of years. By the way, we're really lucky to have Chris Pierpont, who works on this all the time from the institution level, trying to identify real concrete opportunities for this program to work. One of the good things that we have going is that our Director of Corrections, Harold Clark, ran a highly successful PI program in Nebraska. He also oversaw that program in the state of Washington. So, it seems like he'd be an excellent source to work this through. Also, the previous Director of Virginia Correctional Enterprises wasn't real enthused about PI. I think it maybe got in the way of traditional industries for him. But we have a new director coming in, John Garment, I think, in November. So what we're trying to do now is schedule meetings with the Department of Corrections to see if we can raise this to them again. There's a couple of people I'm particularly high on. Tony Ellis of South Carolina is the one I think of first. Tony had a multi-million-dollar PI program going in South Carolina. Hundreds of inmates employed working there. It was profitable for those inmates and their families, for crime victims, and for the state of South Carolina. So he's available to us for consulting. Rip Young in Tennessee, similar kind of thing, built up very strong PI programs in a relatively short period. So we could do this. I also point out that this is another facet of, in some sense, of not legislative advocacy, but another thing that Virginia Cure is working on actively. So there are other roles you can have depending on your passion. This happens to be mine. The fourth point in this is that employment discrimination after release is both bad economics, also very common, and may violate federal law, and it would be violating the Civil Rights Act of 1964. You may or may not be aware, but one form of discrimination is called disparate impact. It means that the overt purpose of a behavior may not be to discriminate, but the consequence of it is to discriminate. And because persons of African American descent are so overrepresented among prison populations, a consequence of employment practices that choose not to hire people with criminal records is to discriminate against persons from those backgrounds, those and Hispanic. So that a firm, as I understand it, and we'll post on the website where you can look at the guidelines and so forth, but the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has come out with guidelines for proper behavior by employers. And a blanket discrimination against persons with conviction records violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and a firm has to take into account three characteristics called the green rules after a court case.
Green?
Green, like the color green. But it was a court case involving a person whose last name was Green. And the three rules are they must consider, they don't give details about this, that's where it gets a little fuzzy, but where you must consider the nature of the crime, the nature of the work, and the amount of time that has passed since the offense when considering an applicant's application for a job. So no blanket discriminators, you must consider those three things. It's unclear to me and apparently to others how much they must look individually. They may have some mass screens, but those screens have to take into account those things as well. So the long and short of that is that we seem to have stronger teeth in these Civil Rights Act of 1964 requirements, and there have been some big settlements. Pepsi, BMW, and Dollar General, I think, all have had, I think, multi-million-dollar settlements. Yeah.
Walmart also.
Pardon me?
Walmart.
Oh, really? Okay, okay. So I wanted to point that out to you, and then bring it to the next point. The fifth point being, is that we have been working, Virginia Cure has been working, trying to approach Amazon in the Richmond area. I realize now that not everybody here is from Richmond this morning. My head sort of moved south. But Amazon in the last year or so has opened 2 very large warehouses called fulfillment centers. Judging from the boxes in my garage, we get lots of fulfillment from Amazon. But they hire over 1,300 persons to work in those warehouses, and it's gone up to about 2,000 over the holiday season. And so far as I can see, it's not always easy for them to fill those slots. But they have a very harsh, so far as we can tell, rule about hiring persons with conviction records. Very hard to find out what Amazon's about. They don't walk out and say, hey, yeah, let me tell you about how we discriminate. But we've been working to send in test applicants to Amazon, and we've also done a number of other things, and I got a copy of their policy last year. It's changed, I'm not aware of it. But at that time, their policy, as I understand it, is that they will not hire a person to work at Amazon until 7 years after the expiration of a person's sentence. So if you had gotten released from an offense, and that's virtually any offense, the exceptions are trivial, possibly espionage or something, almost nothing. So if you were on parole for 5 years, you would still wait another 7 years after that before they would consider hiring you to work in a warehouse. And as far as I can see from having been out there with another applicant last week and wanting to use one of the bathrooms, Amazon is kind of like a prison. You can't get in there, and you certainly can't get out. So security is pretty tight. It's very odd that they can't welcome more persons. Now, they may be changing, but we don't see any strong evidence of that. So we think that Amazon's currently highly restrictive policies are harming the firm. When we go back to this definition of discrimination, I mean, they are having job fairs, they're doing all kinds of things to try to get workers. There's a fairly high turnover rate there. So we think they're harming themselves by not being willing to hire perfectly capable people to work in their warehouses who are otherwise, as we would say, fully qualified to do so. And 2 things I would ask of you. I realize that most of you, dawned on me again this morning, are not residents of the Richmond area. But if you know someone whom you think might be qualified to work in an Amazon warehouse, I would love to know about that person.
I have already done it.
Oh, okay.
You know, I'm in Petersburg, playing
Oh, in Petersburg.
and Richmond.
Yeah, and did we?
And I'm a school social worker who works with young people that are on IEPs until they're 22.
Okay.
To the individual education plan
Okay.
for student and special ed. So I've already tested it. I've already tested it. I went and followed where those students were after they turned 22, who had been inside.
Mm-hmm.
When they turn 18, they either go down to the Petersburg City Jail or they go to Riverside City Jail. So I tried it myself to see if Amazon was going to let us in. So I found the person who I taught over 10 years ago. I went to Petersburg in 2000, over 10, 13 years ago, and he has been off of parole for over 7+ years.
Okay.
And I've experienced the same thing. And then I went to the Indian Festival on Sunday, September 29th. And a gentleman was with one of these health things given out, and I was getting all my healthy stuff collected and everything. And he whispered in my ear, he said, "What do you do, young lady?" I said, "I am a school social worker for Petersburg Public Schools." "Well, don't tell anybody, but my son works at Amazon." "And tell anybody what, sir?" He said, "Oh, they need to learn how to keep their pants up. They need to learn how to shave. They need to learn." I said, "I beg your pardon? And you don't want me to share this with Petersburg Public Schools?" and the persons that I work with, I would not call your son's name. I don't know your son from Adam's cat. So I'm building into what you're saying, that there is overt discrimination, and you're in Petersburg, a town where 99% African American, and African American males, as you said, have been stripped away from that town. And we have no middle class. There's no middle class.
You're talking about the Dinwiddie facility, I guess.
The Dinwiddie facility. I went out to the Dinwiddie facility. There's no middle class in Petersburg. You've got downtown, old town, and everything is regentrification.
Maybe we can talk a little bit afterwards. I appreciate
We will.
that. And that is the second point.
Yeah.
If someone knows persons who have applied to Amazon to work in these fulfillment centers, and I'm as interested in knowing about people who have successfully applied and gotten hired as I am in persons who have been turned away. The experience we have with our test cases is that persons have applied, been accepted, then they say you're accepted pending your background, and then about 2 weeks later they're rejected because of background, and they've not been successfully hired. These including people with minor shoplifting charges before and so forth. So we're working on that, and I guess the argument we would like to make to them, and we have indirectly made overtures to them, because we know other nonprofits are willing to work with us in building that support we were talking about for persons who've been incarcerated, that we would work with them in a test program.
Public money to move their facility here?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I'm saying, so
1.3
to
million or
me,
something?
Yeah.
Yeah.
well,
Well,
that might be a bad use of our tax money.
Yeah.
apparently I'm at my end. So, but if any of you know about those kinds of persons who are interested or have had the experience, I very much would like to learn about those. Thank you all.
Thank you, Tom. But we do have Senator Evan, who is supposed to be here at 1, talking about Red Onion, and we're probably still eating lunch, but we do have a space. And if you want to talk to Tom, that's wonderful. He's going to stay for lunch, right? And there may be a little time. Ron Fisher in the back has information on his projects he's been working on. So maybe you could set up your chart back there and people could wander over. The lunch is set up. We have sandwiches from Panera, sandwiches, cookies, and lots of salads. We have vegetarian and other choices. So please come up and get some lunch. If you're not already,
You're so good. Thank you. You're good. All good. I love your energy. You don't want pepper.